Yo, it's King Bullet here. If you like Attack on Titan, please sub and like the video. And you might as well click that bell icon, it keeps you updated. So what's today's video? We know that Isayama struggled with ending his series, since he stated directly that he struggled with concluding the themes, disappointed by some elements of his writing, and his inability to write a closure for particular themes and interactions between characters, like Eren and Armin, etc. But I want to propose a question, without coming off crazy. What if Isayama did intend this ending? And what if he purposely destroyed it the way he did? The inspiration for this video, and the topic of this video, came from a prior video I did, when I analysed the ending for the first time, in which I compare Isayama to an artist from a Dada movement, in which I say there's a possibility that he caused absurdity on purpose. Some of this analysis is based off the material I found in threads and from talking to people, so I will link down a ton of material if you do want to see that in the description. One of the reasons I think this might actually be the case is because I think Isayama is a diligent writer. He's shown so in the past. He can write parallel characters, he can foreshadow, he understands character development, character progression, and when character regression is needed. However, this final chapter, and if I'm being honest, the final two chapters, have been a little bit out of character for him, as if someone else wrote them. A common refutation I tend to get to all of this writing stuff is that Isayama was trying to create oxymorons and purposely trying to contradict himself, as well as regress his character to cause irony, I suppose. However, he's never really utilized that in the past, hence it doesn't really make sense for him to start now, especially at the end. None of this really makes any sense, since Eren's character did regress, since Eren's character is consistently written to follow an archetype where he can learn from his mistakes and develop. So Isayama himself knows that he built Eren up as his character. Take for example the Uprising arc, learned that he could forge his own future, and that he wasn't bound by the past. The final chapter kind of contradicting that would mean regression. Regression is usually considered a bad thing. Only very rarely is it considered good, and that's only when it's set up and it makes sense for the story thematically. So you can't baselessly assert that, oh look, he was a slave this entire time. Well, an oxymoron. Especially when the author spent an entire arc, even arcs, developing his character. So saying Eren's development up until the final chapter was a facade is a little bit like saying it was all a dream at the end kind of thing. So if Isayama possibly knows that all of this is technically bad writing for the way this series is written, why would he go along with it, and why would he do this? Well, we'll have to bring this interview up here. Isayama is asked, what's his ideal character like? Isayama replies, someone who does not lie. From a story's circumstances, to lie means a character twisted his or her original will or resolve. I find the most appealing are those who operate according to their own resolve, as well as those who, as metafiction would say, rise up against the entire world. On the contrary, I feel like characters who become pawns to the storyline are unattractive. Often, the main character will give up on their original goal due to the story's development, so those who stand opposite to him or her can become more fascinating. This is why in the final chapter it being revealed that Eren for the last 2 seasons really has been the facade was really disappointing, since Isayama doesn't like characters like that. That's why lying is, quote, twisting the protagonist's resolve and will. And we know this is the case, since Eren says to his story that he doesn't like facades, that he finds them disgusting really. Eren also became a pawn to the story, not really having a will of his own, and he couldn't even give Ymir what she wanted. So Eren lied, had a facade, therefore in Isayama's own words, had twisted resolve and was unattractive as a character. Since he didn't really have anyone to oppose his strong will, that means all of the characters around him who opposed him were in Isayama's own words less interesting. So I'm starting to think Eren in the final chapter became a protagonist that Isayama completely despises, and that he purposely created him to be that. But could this be backed up by anything else? Here's an interesting interview in which Isayama is asked which character reflects him. He says probably Armin, but lately he'd say maybe it was Eren after all. He initially believed that this type of character was necessary for the story. Isayama then pauses. Is he implying Eren wasn't important to the story after all? But initially with him came something of a feeling. He was a part of the inner Isayama, something that he really didn't want to see. Perhaps Isayama sees himself as a liar, someone with twisted resolve and will, someone he completely despises, yet is a real him, the inner him. He also implies Eren may not actually even be important to the story, and that he relates to Eren. Perhaps Isayama struggled to find self-worth. Isayama's father wasn't really happy with him becoming a mangaka, and Isayama wasn't even sure he wanted to pursue being an author and a mangaka. So perhaps that's what it was in reference to. Isayama also stated that he wanted to hurt the readers, so that's possibly what he meant by having twisted resolve and lying. Perhaps all of his foreshadowing was all for nothing. That's what he means by him being a liar and Eren being a liar. And that's why he concludes the interview by saying that Eren was a part of the inner him that he really didn't want to see. In the most recent guidebook that Isayama released, he talks about his outburst of emotion and sadness and jealousy that Eren feels was the real Eren, and it implies that Eren was back. I don't necessarily agree, since Eren did show a lot of emotion, even as a character with strong resolve, because initially he did state that Eren was important to the story. This was earlier on in the series when he had stronger resolve, but as he lost this, he became less important. So ultimately, I believe Isayama was trying to make a personal statement about himself, and maybe he just gave out. Or even more interestingly, he sold out. He sold out his series. Perhaps that's why he's a liar and has twisted resolve in his own eyes. We know Isayama's relationship with Kawabuto, his editor, wasn't too great. Now, according to Kawabuto himself, he didn't really force Isayama to do much, and a lot of the writing he was free to do himself. However, I think it's pretty well known that Kawabuto definitely favors some things over other things, including ships. He told Isayama that he didn't need to worry about criticism because he wrote what he wanted to write. Kawabuto tells us after the manga was concluded, Isayama was really troubled by criticism since a lot of people didn't like it for obvious reasons. Isayama tells Kawabuto that he's not sure he sent out the right message, especially with the whole Armin and Eren interaction. Is he saying genocide is fine? Kawabuto kind of reassures him. I will quote Isayama, "If I just tell people not to kill, then it wouldn't make much sense to them, because if there were 7 billion people in the world who all know you shouldn't kill, it wouldn't stop murderers, even if they know killing is wrong, so it loses its meaning. However, if you're saying killing people is okay, it would be more impactful, because as a result, people would look at you and think you're strange, and they'd say something like that. So sometimes you draw something differently to convey a message." Kawabuto said he said this in a context that wasn't actually related to Attack on Titan. This leads me to believe Isayama was really obsessed with what message he was sending out, but more than just that, this transcended just the manga. He wanted to prove to people that killing is wrong, but he heavily struggled to do it. He wanted to do it in a unique way, but perhaps he overtried. Now, very strangely, what Kawabuto says to Isayama kind of confuses me, because he says, well, that's fine, because if enough people read Attack on Titan, there's no need for actual people to die, right? People can read the manga, they can disagree with the message that Attack on Titan is sending them, and therefore no, genocide is bad, since it's being justified in the story. But what Kawabuto doesn't understand is, this therefore makes the message of a story bad, hence the story. So the way Kawabuto understood it, and what Isayama was possibly trying to go for, is to make the story bad on purpose. And I think this heavily backfired, if I'm being honest. It's really weird because, you know, I always considered Attack on Titan a series where the author isn't really trying to shed light on what's right and what's wrong, but rather explain why somebody we would consider evil by normal standards turned out the way they did. I think there's even an interview telling us this, so it's not just my interpretation. So once again, the author has contradicted himself. You get a lot of mangaka who actually struggle to write their story. They may be good, but they always need that extra edge. Usually that's what the editor's there for, to check their work over, to give them inspiration, ideas, and to most importantly challenge their work. For example, take Kishimoto. Kishimoto is known as one of the greatest mangaka of all time, and his story of Naruto will never be forgotten, because it's brilliant. However, he needed a lot of help from his editor. His editor would constantly criticize Kishimoto, even telling him he's not that great of a writer. That's the kind of support you need from your editor, obviously in moderation. For example, the editor of Naruto told Kishimoto to make Sasuke, and look how important Sasuke turned out to be for the story of Naruto. The main plot of Naruto being the philosophical struggle between Naruto and Sasuke. The point being, Kawabuto was more like a yes man, or that's what it comes across as, someone who cared more about the business side of things and keeping his mangaka happy, rather than criticizing him and driving forward the plot and the writing. Do you really expect people to be like, look at what a loser Eren is? Genocide is for losers. Let's not do it. Anyway, another aspect of his ending was comedy, especially with Armin calling Eren pathetic. This is like meta commentary, right? Obviously, it wasn't the only comedic scene. There was a whole Reiner sniffing Historia's letter. Now, what really annoys me about this, there's no closure on if Reiner really escaped his depression. Considering that the author considers him one of the protagonists of a series, as well as his favorite character, I find this depressing. Okay, now luckily for us, Isayama has established that he really cares about the message of Attack on Titan and he doesn't want to send out a bad message. You'd think that, right? But now let's move on to relationships. The relationship between Ymir and King Fritz. Looking at the most recent guidebook, there's like a section dedicated to them about their really weird and abusive relationship. Apparently Ymir having children with King Fritz was proof of their bond, despite King Fritz being massively abusive towards her. It was never really portrayed as a negative thing, so I'm not sure what kind of message he's trying to send here. In my opinion, this is more concerning than all of the genocide stuff, since we all know at the end of the day, despite it being portrayed really badly, Isayama condemns genocide. However, in this situation with the relationships, almost every relationship is somewhat abusive, or at least every major one, excluding Armin and Annie, I suppose. And in all of the major relationships I'm talking about, there's really no disapproval of that type of relationship, which I initially thought the author was going down the route of, well, this is predeterminism. There's a lot of relationships and bonds between people that are sometimes determined and unbreakable. For example, the Ackerman bond, etc. However, there was no closure on this. It was never really demonstrated that these bonds are breakable, even post-death, as Mikasa kind of displayed with Eren. And obviously, in Isayama's own words, since Ymir had children with King Fritz, they're still bound together. I know in the data book, it states that Mikasa gains their strength through her memories of Eren, but it's literally demonstrated that this is not the case, since Mikasa is visibly unhappy visiting the grave and can't let Eren go, like he stated he wanted her to, literally twice. Therefore, can't let this separation between the two happen, like Isayama intended, as he's also stated in the guidebooks, which does make sense, since I think it's much more of a positive positive message to show that you're not necessarily bound by predeterminism or even fate. I suppose that's the message he was going for with the whole Eren being a slave. I think Kabuto even states that Eren doesn't really care about Mikasa until the end, since throughout the story Eren knows that Mikasa will always be by his side. What a toxic message. Moving on to another relationship similar to this, and that's between Historia and the farmer. The newest guidebook finally confirms that the farmer is the father of her child, but calls him her childhood friend, which is really strange since he was actually her bully when they were younger. He would kind of stone her. The MPs called her lowborn and pretty much like a hoe for having a premarital sexual relationship. Isayama doesn't really do much to challenge their perception, other than having Flock call him stupid and them kind of dying. The main issue being that ideology wasn't really challenged, the misogyny really. Historia also looks visually unhappy around the farmer, so I'm starting to see like a reoccurring pattern in all of these relationships. They're all really toxic, but they haven't been challenged. This is literally her entire section in the guidebook. I think in this final guidebook is stated that she was like a sub-character or side character, which is really disappointing since Isayama stated she was one of his favorite characters. And not just relevant to the main plot, but one of the protagonists. Her pregnancy didn't really mean anything, so she was completely sidelined. I don't even know what the relevance of her was in the final arc. I don't know why the author had her give birth during the rumbling. Actually, I might be able to shed some light on that. If you've seen my Eren motivation video, you know that there's a lot of evidence supporting that Eren cared about Historia. And if you've read chapter 130, you should all really know what purpose that chapter served. There's literally no question Isayama purposely made that chapter really romantic. In fact, I think the way they're positioned is like a homage to classic poses in shoujo confessions. Within that chapter, undeniably, we literally see Eren think about his conversation with Historia when it comes to the topic of love, literally. Obviously posing that one verbatim question, what would you think about me having a child? That's a bit of a weird question. You wouldn't really ask anyone that, especially someone to the opposite gender of you. So very obviously, the author was trying to mislead the reader. However, it wasn't even misleading, it was straight up lying. Since all of these events that happen in this chapter are literally unexplained by the ending. In fact, I think some of the things that happen in that chapter are literally unjustifiable. Like, how do you explain thinking about someone in the context of love for like no reason? And why would Isayama use a character who he considers one of his favorite characters, Historia, as nothing but like a plot twist tool when he considers her important to the story, literally up there with Eren? Well, this is what I think. You know how Isayama said before that lying twists his resolve and his will? Well, that's exactly what he did here. He lied. He became the villain of his series. And this wasn't the only way he did it. Thematically, there was a lot of contradiction, with Eren being unable to stop his cycle of hatred and the Titans existing, his island getting destroyed, and all of his hatred still continuing. Isayama said that he had a glass in his hand, and because he'd finished his series, he's free. This is what he sees as freedom. However, states that Isayama was full of regret because of his inability to write certain things. So ultimately, he ended his career with regret. The irony being that he wrote a character, Ymir telling us to not live with regret. But that's exactly what he's done, the author. So did Isayama intend to ruin his series this way? I think so. Do I think he's regretful? Maybe. Did you enjoy this video? Well, that's up to you. Don't forget to like the video and sub. If you enjoyed it, it took a lot of work and a lot of research to find all of these interviews, even talking to people. So it would be much appreciated if you could support me in any way possible. Regardless, thank you for making it towards the end. You can check out some of my other videos if you like this kind of stuff. Anyway, peace out.